Welcome back to Cruder.com. In this first video on array formulas, we're going to simply just be going over what they are. So like most people, you probably have no idea what they truly are, so what are they? And I've put together this definition of how I define them. So simply put, an array, it's just a range of cells or a list of values. It's simple as that. Just a range of cells or a list of values within those cells. But wait, there's more. There's always more. You know how in some of the formulas you can't select a range of cells or a list of values? Say for instance you're using a rounding formula and it only says you can use only one number. Well, what if you want to do a list of numbers to round? You can't do that. And so now you need to copy that formula down hundreds or thousands of rows and run that same rounding formula on each and every row. Well, array formulas fix this. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of the simple examples that I've already put together here. Now this first example is with this list of different types of sports. So I have soccer, basketball, football, and baseball. And I have down here a formula that just says it equals this range. So if we hit enter, we get a value symbol saying Excel doesn't know how to compute this. And that's because Excel is used to saying, hey, I can reference and return one cell at a time and show you soccer all by itself. But if you go ahead and say, hey, show me a list saying all of them, Excel has no idea how to display all of them at once. And then in what type of format would Excel display it all in one cell? So let's hop back in here with F2 and use the shortcut key for evaluating formulas just by hitting F9. And notice that Excel realizes what you're selecting. It says, hey, I get it. It says soccer, basketball, football, and baseball. And notice that we have curly brackets surrounding the sports. These curly brackets are saying that Excel realizes that it's an array. So now if we hit enter, it says soccer, and it only returns soccer. That's it. That's all Excel can return. So the same thing happens when I say equals the list here, and then as I have a big note here, Control-Shift-Enter. So when we use array type formulas, you have to press Control-Shift-Enter to let Excel know you're talking about an array. So if we do that, Excel returns soccer. Now the thing is it doesn't return all of them like it did here when I hit F9. It doesn't return all of the sports. It just returns the first one because it doesn't know exactly how to display the second, third, and fourth. So let's hit Control-Z and then Control-Shift-Enter. And let's move on to the second example. In this next example, we're going to be looking at counting these four different numbers. So when we count the numbers, it'll be 1, 1, 1 plus 1, which equals 4. So when I open up the formula, you can see that I'm just referencing this array. And notice that the count formula has value 1, 2, and so forth. And it says, hey, I can take as many values as you put in here. And it's ready for an array. So when I hit enter, it gets it. It knows to return 4. It understands how to do that. If I hold Control Shift and enter, it still gets it. And notice that up in the formula bar, when we enter an array formula as Control Shift enter, Excel puts in the curly braces around the formula. That's not me typing it. That's Excel putting it in there, realizing that I've hit Control Shift plus enter. So let's go in here again, F2, and let's just evaluate this piece and hit F9, and Excel puts the curly braces around it saying it's an array, and the array is 1, 2, 3, 4. And if I hit enter, Excel still realizes that it's just 4 different values that we want to count. So the difference between the first one and the second one is that this formula is built for an array, and that this formula just saying equals something is not built for an array. That's why it won't display all 4 at once. It can only display 1 at a time. And then hold Control-Shift-Enter. And let's get a little bit more complicated when we go into this third example. So in this one, we're going to do some rounding. And specifically, we want to round these numbers first and then sum up the rounded numbers. So currently, your process will probably be like, hey, let's add in a new column and say equals round down and say this number, comma, -3 digits, and that'll come up to $51,000, and then you'll just drag the formula down. Fine, but the thing is you're taking up more space on your spreadsheet now because you're having to do this formula all the way down your spreadsheet. Now Excel is doing a lot of separate computations. So what I'd like to do is show you how you can do it all in one step. So let's undo all this real quick. And let's pop into this formula and see what I've done. You can see that I have two formulas in here right now. I have a sum formula, and then within the sum formula, I have a round down formula. And so let's start with the round down. So let's just remove this sum formula quickly and hit enter. And of course, Excel cannot evaluate round down on an array of values. So we have to hit Control-Shift-Enter. Now you'll see that Excel is only displaying the first value being rounded down to 51,000. And that's very similar to what we saw in this first example where soccer is the only one displayed. And that's because this round down formula can only display one answer at a time. It says, hey, I can round all of them down, but I can only display one at a time because I don't know what you want me to do with those other values, which is why I went ahead and I said, hey, let's wrap a sum formula. And let's take a look at this sum formula real quick. So I just typed sum, opened it up, and it's asking for number, 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 number. Now going back to formulas 101, if we go ahead and remember that formulas are evaluated from the inside out, meaning round down, this formula will be evaluated first. Let's go ahead and do that and hit F9. And you can see that the round down formula has actually rounded each one correctly to 51,000, 59, 87, and 9,000. And they've separated it with a semicolon. And because of that semicolon, the sum formula understands that they are separate numbers, and we'll go ahead and add them up. Now let's go ahead and undo this, Control Z, and go back to round down and finish off the formula with the last closing bracket. And before we just hit enter, make sure we have Control Shift and then hit enter. And Excel is evaluating as an array formula that it's $206,000. Notice that in the formula bar, Excel also has notified us that we've punched it in as an array because of these curly braces around the formula. Now let's go ahead and get into this next example, which gets even more complex. In this final example, I've listed out sales numbers, 4 different sales numbers, and I'm asking the question, is it greater than 100,000? So if you didn't know how to use array formulas right now, you'd either start by filtering this data and saying only show data greater than 100,000, so these two would get excluded, or you go ahead and add another column and write an if statement that says, is this value, this sales value, is that greater than 100,000? And then say yes or no. And then you could easily filter again on yes or no's, or you could just sum up just the yeses. And essentially what I've done in this formula, that if I open it up here, you can see I have a sum formula, an if formula, and I have one array and a second array. And I'm comparing this array against a criteria if it's greater than $100,000. This is basically the same thing as what your sum if or sum ifs formula and filtering on a criteria. And I understand that you probably would never use this example, but I think it's a great example of showing you how an array formula works. So let's get into how this formula works and start by stripping out this sum formula, getting rid of that. And all right, so now we're back to just a basic if statement. If, and then within the if statement, I have the first piece, the logic test. Then I have if it's true, then return this value here, this sales value. And even let's make it a little bit more interesting. Let's put in the same round down formula, which would be kind of interesting. So we're going to round that formula down, or that value of this, if it is greater than 100,000. So let's round it down -3 again, so to the thousands place. So it'll be 90,000, 77, 134, and 156. So now we have two formulas in here. Let's see how it works. So the first piece, again, it's the logic test. Let's understand how Excel is evaluating this. Let's hit F9, and we're seeing true and false answers. So false, false, true, true. So just like a normal if statement, if the logic test returns as false, then it's going to go to the false value. If it returns as true, like it did here in the third, it is greater than 100,000, it's going to go to the value if it's true. So now let's see what this formula is doing. Let's evaluate the if true with F9. And so it's actually going to match these up. So it's going to say the first one's false and it was 90. But since it is false, it's going to go to the 0. Now let's look at the second one. Same thing, false, go to 0. True though, it's going to go to the third value in the array, which is the 134,000. And same thing with this last true, it's going to go to the 156. But just like the first simple example, what would you think is going to happen when we hit Control-Shift-Enter on this formula? Because the if statement doesn't know how to display all of these answers. It doesn't know how to display 2 zeros followed by the last 2 answers here. So if you guessed 0, you're right, because the first answer is answering false, which would go to 0. So now let's go ahead and just undo what we've done. So I'm going to hit Control-Z, and I can actually back up only one time. So now we need to rewrite this piece because we've evaluated into as text into the formula. I'm going to delete it. And the logic test, if you remember, it was just selecting the range of values that I want to run against the criteria of, is it greater than $100,000? And then I'm going to hit Control-Shift-Enter. And like I said, it's going to be 0 because the first answer, this $90,000, it's not greater than 100,000. Therefore, it went to the 0. And it's just like the soccer over here, where it's only displaying 1. The if statement doesn't know how to display more than one answer. So that's why I had to wrap it with a formula that can take multiple values. This is already an array formula. It's ready for multiple values. So the if statement will give the sum formula a whole bunch of different numbers. And let's go ahead and wrap it around. And let's look at this number and evaluate it with F9 and see what it returns. It should say 0, 0, 134, 156. And that's what the if statement provided to the sum formula. Let's undo that with Control-Z and hit Control-Shift-Enter, and we get $290,000.